Well, it's always risky trying to predict the future, but history teaches that the past can give us some pretty solid hints. That's what the Turning Point will try tonight. Janice Stein is the founding director of the Munk School of Global Affairs. Saeed Khan is a history professor at Wayne State University in Detroit. Balbina Huang is a professor of international studies at Georgetown University. And Samantha Nutt is founder of War Child Canada. They're a peek into the future in a moment. But first, some history.
Welcome to the 22nd Olympic Winter Games.
He looked so calm and confident standing there, a kind of king of the world pose. And at that moment, he probably thought he was. The world at his feet, as Vladimir Putin welcomed everyone to Sochi.
We're in Sochi because of his leadership.
Billions watching the leader, who even Forbes magazine calls the most powerful in the world. Ruling with an iron fist, $100 a barrel oil fueling his treasury, the rest of the world anxious about his intentions, but still many were lining up to make deals. But that was then. This is now. Crimea, Ukraine, Malaysian Air 17 cratered that apparent confidence in Putin and Russia. And within weeks of that Olympic glory, much of the rest of the world started loading on the sanctions. Then the price of oil collapsed, and with it, much of Russia's economy and the value of the ruble. Putin is still in power, but he's wounded, and a lot of people are asking, what happens now? The Russian example of 2014 shows how quickly things can change. And in a world of trouble spots, there's lots of reasons to be wary. From North Korea to North Africa, from Assad to Obama, from recession to revolution. Where is the world heading, and what will 2015 look like? There's much there, so let's get at it. All right, let's start from the global security perspective. What is the top place to watch for in 2015, Janice?
Well, I think you just talked about it, Peter. It's Russia, and it's Russia because it's both fragile and angry. It's fragile because its economy is in deep trouble. This is a petrodollar economy. It's an aging society, and Putin depends for his popularity on providing a better standard of living for the Russian people. Once that starts to fray, he could be in deep trouble and he could lash out.
Saeed?
I'm going to say Greece as a barometer. What we find is with the new year, markets across the world are down as much as 2%. The euro is down at a 9-year low compared to the dollar. There is a progressive party that looks to win the elections this month in Greece, which may repudiate some of the austerity measures which it sees has been imposed upon it. And this could create a ripple effect among many of the weaker economic countries in Europe. And there could be then a fissure between the richer countries like Germany and France, creating an overall anxiety there.
It's interesting, because our eye had been so on that story a couple of years ago, and now it's back at it again. Albina, where are you looking?
I would say China. Much as you say, the Russian economy is very fragile. Actually, so is the Chinese economy. And usually I'm very reticent to give China too much credit. But in fact, of course, we know China is now the second largest economy in the world. But any turbulence within China economically could set off social unrest, which could then set off political unrest, which then could lead to global proportions.
Sam?
I think the most important one has been saved to the end, Peter. I would say there's no greater humanitarian risk and disaster right now than what's happening in the Iraqi-Syrian region still. If you look at ISIS and the threat that it represents, not just regionally, but to the world at large, military efforts have been able to contain the spread of ISIS, but it still threatens to engulf many of its neighbors, and it is still an absolute disaster for those civilians living in that part of the world.
Interesting. You picked, all four of you picked different spots. Let's talk about issues, global security issues. Saeed, what would be yours?
I would have to say oil prices. I mean, while we may be benefiting from some more money kept in the wallet based at what we're paying at the pump, this has the potential of destabilizing regimes, destabilizing economies. As Janice mentioned, when you have an economy like Russia, which is so dependent on the petrodollar, the ruble is in shambles, the economy in Russia is in shambles, but other countries that are also similarly dependent, Venezuela, Nigeria, we don't know yet what's going to be the impact of a reduction in oil prices on those regimes.
Balbina, issue.
I would actually say some sort of transnational issue, whether we're talking about an unexpected pandemic. We saw Ebola, which seems to be contained, but it could easily go global. Some sort of major climate change-related disaster on the, 100 times or 10 times the scale of Superstorm Sandy that hit the United States, which will wipe out a major coastal city, for example. So I think these are the kinds of issues that we're not prepared to deal with.
Sam.
I think it's political instability within states. I mean, we're looking at this phase of post-Cold War, post-colonial transition. A lot of countries that were being held together and groups that were being held together by totalitarian regimes that are now crumbling without a lot of external influence, and now they're fighting each other. They're fighting each other for resources, for political control, for autonomy, whether you're looking at Yemen or Libya or elsewhere in the world. I mean, what we're seeing right now is that discord and those excluded groups who are now coming out and who are trying to mount an opposition to that state.
What's your issue, Janice?
You know what I'm paying attention to, Peter, is this unprecedented wave of migrants and refugees that are on the move now around the world. We haven't seen this since World War II. It's really stunning. And at the same time, we have refugee takers that are putting up barriers. That's all you hear about in Europe right now is building up walls against migrants. That's an explosive situation. I think of it as a steam kettle. If the spout can't lift up, which means if countries can't take refugees, the kettle explodes.
Albina, you help us out on starting this next one. What slid under the radar in 2014 that's likely to be above the radar in 2015?
Well, I think potentially two countries. One is Nigeria. I think that we have essentially are underrating the importance of Boko Haram and the possibility of it to spread and grow, which could then lead to instability in the region. But also, I would say North America, Mexico. I'm surprised that here, well, perhaps in Canada, you're paying more attention than in the United States, but we have completely ignored the increase in violence in Mexico. Most of it seems to be focused on the migrant issue, but the level of violence in Mexico, potential instability could really have a ripple effect.
Sam.
I agree. I think Nigeria is certainly a very, very important one to watch. But I think as well, for me, it's Libya. In 2015, certainly all indications are that Libya is going to fail, finally fail, and that the consequences are going to be absolutely horrific. I mean, I think we could be looking at a tragedy on the scale of what's happened in Syria. These are very fractured groups. It is becoming much, much more dangerous, much more violent, and it does also threaten to spill over into neighboring countries, into Mali, for example. We've seen some of those pressures, and I think that it's going to get very, very, very much worse in 2015.
A country that we were part of liberating.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, we have a tendency to have these military incursions, and we unfortunately leave a lot of political Humpty Dumptys left in its wake.
Janice.
So this is a funny one, Saudi Arabia. And why am I paying so much attention to Saudi Arabia? It is the oil price maker of the world right now. It is playing a long strategic game with steely resolve, and yet the king, 91 Abdullah, is sick in the hospital with pneumonia. The health program, he's apparently breathing with the assistance of a tube. And there are only two sons of the original king left. One is the Crown Prince Salman, 79, and he has been very powerful, but he's had a stroke. And they took the unprecedented step, Peter, of creating a second Prince Mukran. They've never done that before, which tells me they're uneasy about the succession. If there's any disorder around that, that could really rattle markets.
Saeed.
Well, I'm going to stick with the so-called BRIC countries. We've heard from Russia and we've heard from China, but I'm focusing on Brazil. Brazil has really slipped under the radar last year with corruption, grafting accusations, as well as a weakening economy. Now, Dilma Rousseff was reelected to office as president, and so she is going to have to turn things around in this very important country. I mean, it's the 5th largest country in the world, by far the largest country in South America. And the way that Brazil goes is going to dictate on a global scale economies as well as political stability.
You know, is there somebody or some place that we should be watching for in 2015? I raised this because last year, I mean, at this time last year, none of us, well, I shouldn't say none of us, but a lot of us had no idea where Donetsk was in Ukraine. Then it became this name that we talked about throughout the year. What's the Donetsk this year?
I don't think we should stop paying attention to the Afghan-Pakistan border. If we look at, the tribal areas, if you look at Peshawar, for example, we saw what happened a few weeks ago, the tragic events that unfolded there. I think that Pakistan is extremely fragile right now. I do think that the lack of resolution, the ongoing challenges of both the Afghan Taliban and the Pakistani Taliban mean that there's going to be a great deal of ongoing violence and insecurity, and that area is particularly vulnerable.
Janice.
A small group of islands called the Paracel Islands, very, very claimed by both China and Vietnam, but that's just a stand-in for the South China Sea, Peter. China is really exercising its national muscles in this part of the world. We're very close a few times to very bad encounters between aircraft over the South China Sea. That is a very dangerous part of the world that we're not paying enough attention to.
Saeed.
The Mediterranean coast off Gaza, Israel, Lebanon, and Syria. Recent revelations have shown that there are vast natural gas deposits there. It appears as though part of the planning for seizure or control over these deposits is already underway, involving Israeli interests and even involving some American interests. Given the fact that this is a year where there's going to be Israeli elections, the Palestinian Authority is trying to gain membership into the international criminal courts, and there's their usual and requisite volatility going on between the Israelis and the Palestinians, this is not going to help matters much at all.
Albina.
I would say we should watch for those places where we actually have placed a false sense of hope. So, for example, Myanmar, Burma. I think in Burma, everybody was extremely hopeful that, and we all thought that Burma had turned a corner, but in fact, liberalization, democratization, these are all turning out to be far more difficult challenges and projects in that country than anybody had expected. And again, with Cuba, this very surprising news suddenly of this détente, but I think we ought to maybe tamper down a little bit our optimism as we watch where it goes.
I've got to take a break, but let's do this one quickly. A leader, a face. Give me one who we should be watching.
One who's not
Janice.
getting a lot of attention is Isaac Herzog. This is a stunning emergence of a peace party that nobody thought had a chance even 2 weeks ago. He's turning this into a real horse race, and the outcome of the election, unpredictable.
Saeed.
Narendra Modi in India comes in with quite a landslide victory. Yet recent news out of India is quite volatile, with a lot of religious chauvinism, stories and allegations about forced conversion of Muslims and Christians, a kind of revivalism and revisionism of Hindu nationalism. With Parliament being distracted by these things, Modi has to decide whether he's going to finally speak out about these issues, whether he wants to steward India into the 21st century as an economic power or the century's first fascist state.
Shinzo Abe of Japan. I think for the last 2 decades, the world has essentially dismissed Japan, but don't underestimate it. He just recently won another election, which puts him in place to be potentially the longest leading prime minister in office in the post-war period. If, and of course it's a big if he can turn that economy around, we are talking about a major tilt in power in East Asia. If he can revive Japan, especially at a time when the Chinese economy is faltering.
Same.
I would say Nigeria is good luck, Jonathan. I think he's in trouble. Nigerians are heading to the polls this year. There's always been violence associated with Nigerian elections. I think this year we'll see even more of that, particularly with drop in oil prices and the economic crisis that he's facing, his inability to contain Boko Haram, which is actually growing right now as a threat, the disaffection of the northern parts of the country. I think he's extremely vulnerable, and I think that the country as a whole is very vulnerable.
Got to take that quick break now, but when we come back, this question: who is the wild card in the global security game? Panel's picks when we come back. And welcome back to our first turning point of 2015. At the table, Janice, Saeed, Sam, and Balbina Huang. The unpredictable actor, the wild card in the global security game this year, who could it be, Janice?
Could be good luck, Jonathan, because they're at the coal face of oil prices, and he's Christian, Peter. And usually they rotate the presidency between Christians and Muslims. They're not doing it this year. That's potentially explosive, and it could affect all of Africa.
Saeed.
I would say Turkey. We have now President Tayyip Erdogan, who has a mandate, both in his own mind and certainly with the election polls of last year. And yet, at the same time, there's a lot of domestic turmoil with the opposition, his attitude toward journalists, as well as anybody who tends to be antagonistic toward him. And at the same time, we have to remember that Turkey is on the front line in battles concerning ISIS in both Syria and in Iraq.
Robina.
It has to be Kim Jong-un of North Korea. Now, North Korea tends to be over-exaggerated in terms of, we always seem to be in a crisis mode. In reality, it's been Northeast Asia, the Korean Peninsula, has been actually stable for the last 60 years. The problem, though, is that there is really few other places in the world where you see a meeting of all the great powers that are directly involved, including all the nuclear powers. And if North Korea were to start some sort of, take some action against South Korea, or even collapse internally, then we're talking about major changes in the region and the globe.
You get the last word, Sam?
Iran. Iran is absolutely critical to what's happening in both Iraq and in Syria. They have demonstrated a willingness to re-engage with the world. Dialogue is always better than no conversation in isolation. So I would say Iran is going to be really critical.
You were great. Fascinating look into foreign affairs as we look forward to 2015. I think we're all now prepped for any eventuality, given all the different things you've given us to think about. And thank you as well. Turning Point will be back in a month. And if last year and tonight's discussion is any example, who knows what we could be talking about then.